At my own wedding, my son looked up at me and asked if he did something wrong after my mother-in-law publicly humiliated him, and I was ready to walk away from everything until my husband turned to that entire room and made a choice that no one saw coming. Chapter 1. The day everything felt off. I remember thinking the room was too quiet for a wedding morning. Not silent in the way of peace, but in that strange, suspended way where everything feels like it is waiting for something to break. I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite at the Fairmont in Austin, smoothing my hands down the front of my dress for what had to be the 10th time. The fabric was perfect, fitted exactly the way I had imagined, the kind of dress I never thought I would wear growing up, the kind of dress women like me didn't get to have twice. Behind me, sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching on glass bottles of champagne, soft white flowers, and the quiet hum of a room that had been carefully curated to look effortless. Everything about it said, "This is where you belong now," but I didn't feel like I belonged. I tilted my head slightly, studying my reflection, not searching for flaws. I had already done that years ago. This was something else, a habit I never quite outgrew, that need to check if I was standing correctly, smiling correctly, existing correctly. A voice broke through my thoughts. "Mom, do you think they're going to have chocolate cake too, or just vanilla?" I turned, and there he was, Noah, my 6-year-old, sitting on the edge of one of the chairs, legs swinging slightly, already dressed in his tiny charcoal suit. His tie was crooked, his hair refusing to stay neatly combed, and his entire face lit up with the kind of excitement I used to think only existed in movies. I smiled without thinking. "I think there's going to be both," I said, walking over and crouching in front of him, and I heard a rumor there might be something even better. He leaned in, eyes wide. "What?" "Macarons." He gasped like I had just revealed a secret treasure. "No way." "Way." He grinned, satisfied, like that alone made the whole day worth it. For him, it probably did. I reached up and fixed his tie, my fingers brushing against the small pulse at his neck. Steady, calm, trusting. That trust settled somewhere heavy in my chest. For a moment, I let myself just look at him. There were years where all I had was this, just him, just us. Back in 2020, when everything felt like it was falling apart around the world, I was juggling 3 different jobs, trying to keep a roof over our heads, answering emails at midnight while he slept on the couch next to me because I couldn't afford childcare. There were nights I didn't know how I was going to make it to the next week, let alone this moment. And now, here we were, in a hotel suite that cost more per night than my old monthly rent, about to walk into a room full of people who had never known what it felt like to choose between groceries and gas. I pressed a quick kiss to his forehead. "You ready, mister?" He nodded, completely certain. "Yeah. Are you?" I hesitated just long enough that he noticed. "Yeah," I said, softer this time. "I am." A knock came at the door, and before I could answer, it opened slightly. Daniel stepped in, adjusting the cuff of his shirt as he did. He looked exactly the way he always did when everything was under control. Polished, composed, like nothing in the world could throw him off balance. For a second, the tension in my chest eased. "Hey," he said, his voice warm as his eyes moved between me and Noah. "You both look amazing." Noah beamed. "I got a tie." "I can see that," Daniel said, walking over and crouching beside him. "Looks like we've got some serious competition today." He leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing something important. "I heard there's macarons." Daniel glanced up at me, amused. "Then we'd better not be late." He stood, brushing his hands down his jacket, and that's when I saw it. The flicker. It was small. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but I knew him well enough now to see the difference between calm and controlled. His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down, just for a second, but in that second, something shifted in his expression. Not panic, not even frustration, just tension. I watched him read the message, watched the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Everything okay?" I asked. He locked the screen too quickly. "Yeah, it's nothing important." I held his gaze for a moment longer than usual. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Nothing important. I nodded anyway, because today wasn't supposed to be about that, because I had spent enough of my life picking apart moments like this, searching for cracks before they even formed. Flashbacks don't usually come with warning. They slip in quietly, attached to something small, a tone of voice, a glance, a word. Standing there, watching Daniel adjust his jacket, I suddenly remembered the night before, the rehearsal dinner. Everything had looked just as perfect. Long table, soft lighting, carefully arranged place settings. Veronica sitting at the head, smiling at everyone with that practiced warmth that never quite reached her eyes. She had raised her glass, looked directly at me, and said how important it was for a family like theirs to maintain standards. We've always believed in presenting the best version of ourselves, in making sure everything is aligned. Aligned. I smiled. Of course I had. Later, one of Daniel's relatives had leaned down toward Noah. "So, where's your real dad, buddy?" I answered before Noah had time to process the question. I kept my tone light, my smile steady, like it didn't matter. But it had. It had mattered enough that I didn't sleep much that night. Back in the present, I shook the memory away. We moved down to the ballroom together. The doors opened and the noise of the room enwrapped us instantly. Laughter, music, the soft clinking of glasses. There had to be over 100 people, maybe more. Most of them were strangers to me, faces I had seen in passing, names I had tried to memorize and failed. People who moved easily in this space, who didn't hesitate when they shook hands or made eye contact, who didn't second-guess whether they belonged. I felt it immediately, that shift, like stepping into a room where everyone already knew each other's language and you were still translating in your head. We took our places. I stood beside Daniel, Noah just slightly in front of me, his small hand brushing against mine every now and then. I noticed the looks. Not obvious, not rude, just measured. A whisper behind someone's hand, a glance that lingered half a second too long, a quick look away when I met their eyes. I kept my chin up. I had done harder things than stand in a room full of people who didn't know what to do with me. Then Veronica stood. The room quieted almost instantly. She held her glass with practiced ease, smiling as she began to speak. At first, it was exactly what you would expect. She welcomed everyone, thanked them for coming, spoke about family, tradition, legacy. I let myself relax just a fraction. Maybe I had overthought everything. Maybe this was just nerves. Then her tone shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. She started talking about what it means to truly belong to a family, about blood, about continuity, about how certain things couldn't be replaced. I felt it before I understood it, that tightening in my chest. Then she looked at Noah, directly. There are some children who should not be mistaken as part of a family they were never meant to carry forward. The words didn't land all at once. They hung in the air first, then they dropped. Everything around me blurred. Noah's hand gripped my fingers. "Mom, do you think they're going to have she talking about me?" My heart slammed hard. It felt like it might knock the breath out of me. For a second, I couldn't hear anything else. Not the room, not the music, just the sound of my own pulse and the quiet, confused fear in my son's voice. Something inside me snapped into place. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear. Not today. Not with my son. I hadn't moved yet, hadn't spoken, but I felt the shift. Beside me, Daniel was completely still. I turned my head slowly. He was looking at his mother, then at Noah, then back again. The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. for him. And for the first time since the day had begun, I realized this moment wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about what came after it, and whether we would still be standing in the same place when it was over.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 2. The Moment He Chose. Daniel moved before I could even decide if I was going to breathe. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, just one step forward, measured, deliberate, like he had finally reached a point he could not stand behind anymore. "Mom," he said, his voice low, steady. "You just insulted my son." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They cut clean through the silence that had wrapped around the room. Veronica blinked, her smile flickering for just a second, like she hadn't expected to be challenged out loud. She opened her mouth, ready to smooth it over, to reframe it into something polite, something harmless. Daniel didn't give her the chance. He turned, not just to her, but to the room, to all of them. "She just said that my son doesn't belong in this family." The shift was immediate. I saw it happen in real time. A woman near the front slowly lowered her glass. A man at the second table leaned toward the person beside him, whispering something under his breath. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with recognition. In the back of the room, I caught a glimpse of Sophie. Her phone was already in her hand, lifted slightly, not hidden, not obvious, just there, like her body had reacted before she could think about what it meant. Henry stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. "That's enough," he said, his voice controlled but tight. "This is being taken completely out of context. There's no need to escalate this into something it isn't." Daniel turned his head, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw him interrupt his father without hesitation. "No." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was final. "No, this is exactly what it is." The room held its breath again. Daniel didn't look at Henry anymore. He looked at Noah. My son stood half behind me, his small hand gripping the side of my dress, his eyes wide, searching, trying to understand something that no 6-year-old should ever have to understand. Fear, confusion, and something worse, the beginning of doubt. I felt it hit me like a physical thing. Daniel saw it too. I could tell by the way his shoulders shifted, by the way his jaw tightened. Something in him was moving, something deeper than this moment, something older. I knew just enough about his childhood to recognize it. The pressure, the expectations, the unspoken rules about what mattered and what didn't. The image, the family, the cost of stepping out of line. He took a breath. For a split second, I thought he might step back, not physically, but in that way people do when they choose the easier path, the quieter one, the one that keeps everything intact. Then Noah shifted behind me, just enough that Daniel's eyes dropped to him again. That was it. That was the moment. When he looked back up, something had settled. "If anyone in this room can't accept my son," he said, slower now, clearer, "then they don't have a place in my life." The words didn't explode. They landed. Heavy. Irreversible. Veronica's face went still, not shocked, not hurt, just still, like her mind was scrambling to catch up with what had just happened. Henry looked at Daniel like he didn't recognize him. I stood there, my hand still wrapped around Noah's, and for the first time since we had walked into that room, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. Daniel turned slightly toward me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have seen this sooner." There was no defense in his voice, no excuse, just truth. And somehow that mattered more than anything else he had said. He reached for my hand. "Let's go." He didn't wait for a response. We walked. Not rushed, not stumbling, just walking, straight through the center of the room that had decided, moments ago, whether or not we belonged. No one stopped us, no one said a word, but I felt the shift as we passed. The eyes that followed us weren't the same ones that had been watching before. Something had changed. Not enough to matter yet, but enough to notice. Behind us, I heard the faint clink of glass, the murmur of voices starting to rise again, but none of it touched us anymore. The doors to the ballroom closed with a soft, final sound. And just like that, it was over. Or at least, that version of it. The hallway outside felt colder, quieter, real. Noah's hand was still gripping mine. We didn't speak until we were in the car. Daniel slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and for a moment none of us moved. The silence there was different. It wasn't waiting, it was settling. Noah's voice came first, small but steady. "Did I do something wrong?" The question hit harder than anything that had happened in that room. I turned to him immediately. "No," I said, too fast at first, then softer. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." He watched me, searching my face the way kids do when they're trying to decide if you're telling the truth or just saying something they think you need to hear. I reached over, brushing his hair back. "You hear me. Nothing about that was your fault." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. Daniel's hands were tight on the steering wheel. He hadn't started the car yet. I watched the way his fingers flexed, the way his shoulders rose and fell with a breath he seemed to be trying to control. "I'm not letting that happen again," he said finally, his eyes fixed straight ahead. It wasn't loud, it wasn't emotional, it was something else, a decision. I leaned back in my seat, my body suddenly aware of how tense it had been just to get through that moment. "You don't have to fix everything tonight," I said quietly. He shook his head once. "It's not about tonight." That was all he said, but I understood. This wasn't just about what happened in that room. It was about everything that had been building long before we walked into it. Everything he had ignored, minimized, explained away. Everything I had tried not to see too clearly because I wanted this to work. Noah shifted beside me, leaning into my arm. "Are we still getting married?" he asked. I glanced at Daniel. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again. "Yeah," he said, "we are. Not like that, but we are." I didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. The car finally started. As we pulled away from the hotel, I caught a glimpse of the building in the side mirror. The lights, the people, the version of a life that had just slipped out of reach. For a second, I wondered if we had just walked away from something we could have fixed. Then Noah's hand tightened around mine again. And I knew, some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be left behind. Daniel drove in silence, the city lights blurring past us, each block putting a little more distance between us and the life we had almost stepped into. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no going back to the way things had been, and whatever came after this, it was going to cost something.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 3. When the world starts watching. The first time I saw the video, it only had a few hundred views. It showed up on my Facebook feed like any other post, sandwiched between someone's vacation photos and a recipe video I would never make. For a second, I didn't even recognize it as mine. Then I saw the ballroom. I saw myself standing there, frozen. I saw Noah beside me, small and still, and I heard Veronica's voice, clear and sharp even through the low-quality recording. There are some children who should not be mistaken as part of a family they were never meant to carry forward. My stomach dropped. The clip cut right after Daniel spoke, right after he chose us. I watched it once, then again. By the third time, the views had doubled. By that afternoon, it was everywhere. TikTok, where people replayed the moment with captions and commentary. Instagram, where strangers argued in the comments about boundaries and family. LinkedIn, which surprised me the most, where people in suits and polished headshots were suddenly dissecting my life like it was a case study. I sat at the kitchen table, my phone face down in front of me, trying to decide if I should keep watching or pretend it wasn't happening. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You don't have to look at it," he said. "It's already out there," I replied. He didn't argue with that. My phone buzzed again, a message this time. "Sophie." I hesitated before opening it. "I'm the one who posted it." I stared at the words. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't pretend like I didn't see what happened." For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. Angry, relieved, exposed, all at once. I typed a response, erased it, then typed again. "You didn't do anything wrong." The dots appeared, then disappeared. She didn't reply. Daniel exhaled slowly. "So that's how it got out." I nodded. "I don't think she meant to start something like this." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Doesn't matter what she meant, it started." And it was. The next morning, my phone didn't stop ringing. Notifications stacked faster than I could clear them. Messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Emails, missed calls. By the time I walked into the office, I could feel it before anyone said anything. That shift. People looked up when I passed. Not in the same way as before, not quietly judging. Watching, trying to figure out if I was the same person they had worked with last week. Marcus Bell called me into his office within 10 minutes. He didn't say anything at first, just gestured for me to sit. Then he turned his monitor toward me. The video was paused on Veronica's face. He hit play. We watched it together, the whole thing, no interruptions. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You want to tell me what I'm looking at?" I didn't rush my answer. "I'm looking at someone insulting my son in front of a room full of people," I said, "and I'm looking at my husband telling them it wasn't okay." Marcus nodded once, like he was checking something off internally. "And your position on it?" I met his eyes. "I'm not apologizing for protecting my son." Silence. Then, slowly, he nodded again. "Good," he said, "because we're not planning to apologize for you." I blinked, not expecting that. He folded his hands on the desk. "There's going to be noise. There already is. But from where I'm sitting, you handled yourself just fine." Something in my chest loosened. "Thank you." He gave a small shrug. "Just don't let it interfere with your work. That's the only thing I care about." "I can do that." "I know you can." When I stepped out of his office, Leela was waiting by my desk, holding 2 coffees. She handed me one without asking. "I watched it this morning," she said quietly. I stiffened slightly. "And?" She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The internet is on your side, like very on your side." I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," she said, "but it helps." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the cup. Across town, things weren't going as smoothly. Daniel took a call around noon. I could hear Henry's voice even from across the room, sharp and controlled, the way it was always when he was trying not to sound like he was losing control. "This needs to be handled immediately." Daniel didn't raise his voice. It already was. "You think letting this circulate is handling it? I think it's not my job to clean up something we didn't cause." There was a pause. Then Henry again, tighter this time. "You're making a mistake." Daniel's jaw set. "No, I just stopped repeating one." He ended the call without another word. That night, more pieces started to fall into place. A short article appeared online, not naming us directly, but describing the incident, a comment thread on a business forum discussing reputational risk, a message from someone I had never met saying they had worked with Henry years ago and weren't surprised. Veronica's name started showing up less in the places it used to. Then came the real pushback. A formal email. Daniel forwarded it to me, their attorney. It was written in that careful, precise language that tried to sound neutral while still making its point. They were exploring options regarding visitation rights, grandparents' rights. My stomach dropped again, but this time it was colder. We met Rachel Kim the next morning. Her office was quiet, organized, the kind of place where everything had its place and nothing was left to chance. She read through the email once, then looked up at us.
They can try, anyone can file, but that doesn't mean they'll succeed. What would they have to prove, I asked? That denying them access would harm Noah in a significant way, that you're unfit or that your household is unstable. I almost laughed. She didn't. It happens more than people think, she continued, but from what I've seen so far, they don't have a strong case. Daniel leaned forward. So this goes nowhere. She shook her head slightly. It might not go nowhere. It could go somewhere inconvenient. Legal processes take time. They can create pressure. That's usually the point. I felt that settle into me. Pressure. Another cost. When we left her office, neither of us spoke right away. By the time we got home, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. My phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize. I opened the message anyway. Hey, saw what happened. Thought you might need help handling the situation. Mark. For a second, I just stared at the screen. Years. It had been years since he had said anything to me. And this was what brought him back? I didn't reply. I didn't even think about it. I deleted the message. Some doors don't get reopened just because someone knocks. That night, Noah didn't fall asleep right away. I found him in his room, sitting up in bed, his stuffed dinosaur clutched tightly against his chest. Hey, I said softly, sitting beside him. What's going on? He shrugged, but his grip tightened. Mom, yeah? If I'm not their family, am I still ours? The question was quieter this time, not confused, not exactly, afraid. I didn't answer right away. I pulled him into me, feeling the small weight of him settle against my side. You are the reason we have a family, I said finally, not just part of it, the reason. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, just once. Okay. I stayed with him until his breathing slowed, until his grip on the dinosaur loosened, until I was sure he was asleep. When I stepped out of his room, the house felt too still, like everything was holding its breath again. But this time, it wasn't waiting for something to break. It was waiting to see what would hold. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 4. The Line They Couldn't Cross. It didn't take long for the pressure to find its way to our front door. It was late afternoon when the knock came. Not tentative, not polite. Sharp, deliberate, like whoever stood on the other side expected to be let in. Daniel and I both froze for a second, exchanging a look that said the same thing without words. We knew. He walked to the door, slower than usual, his hand pausing on the handle just long enough to feel like a decision. Then he opened it. Henry stood there, exactly as he always did. Impeccable, controlled, like nothing had changed, even though everything had. Veronica stood beside him, her posture rigid, her expression carefully blank. Daniel didn't step aside. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Henry broke the silence. We need to talk. Daniel didn't move. You can say it from there. Henry's jaw tightened slightly, but he stepped forward anyway. Not pushing, not forcing, just assuming. Veronica followed. And just like that, they were inside. I stayed where I was, near the edge of the living room, one hand resting lightly on the back of the couch. Noah was behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, quiet in a way that wasn't natural for him. Henry looked around briefly, taking in the space like he was assessing something. This doesn't have to go any further, he said finally. This situation can be handled. Handled. Daniel shut the door behind them. How? Henry turned back to him. You issue a statement. You clarify that what happened was misunderstood. You distance yourself from the narrative that's forming. You fix it. Fix it. Daniel didn't answer right away. Veronica still hadn't looked at me. Instead, her eyes drifted toward Noah. Just for a second. Then she looked away again. Like he wasn't there. Like he didn't matter enough to acknowledge. Something cold moved through me. Henry continued. There are consequences to letting something like this spiral. Professionally, socially, legally. He let the last word hang there. Daniel's voice was calm. You mean the email? Henry didn't deny it. We're exploring all options. Of course they were. Veronica shifted slightly, her arms crossing.
"This entire situation has gotten out of control," she said, her tone measured but sharp underneath. "It's embarrassing. It reflects poorly on all of us." All of us. Her eyes flicked past me again, landing somewhere just over my shoulder. On Noah. She lowered her voice, just enough that it felt more private, more cutting. "That child should never have been put in this position to begin with." Noah's hand grabbed the back of my shirt. Hard. I felt it. The way his fingers curled into the fabric, like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid. That was it. Not the wedding, not the video, not the threats. This. I stepped forward before I even realized I was moving. "What did you just say?" Veronica didn't repeat it. She didn't need to. Her silence confirmed it more clearly than any words could have. Henry exhaled sharply, as if I had just made things more complicated than necessary. "We're not here to rehash what was said," he cut in. "We're here to resolve what happens next." "Resolve? You mean control," I said. His gaze snapped at me. "Careful." Daniel shifted then, stepping slightly in front of me, not blocking me but creating space. "I've heard enough," he said quietly. Henry turned back to him. "Then listen carefully. If this continues, we will take the steps necessary to protect our interests, financially, legally, reputationally." The words landed exactly the way they were meant to. Not loud, not emotional, just pressure. Daniel didn't react right away. He stood there looking at his father like he was seeing him clearly for the first time. Then he shook his head. "No." Henry frowned slightly. "No what?" "No," Daniel repeated, more firmly this time. "I'm not doing that." A pause. "You don't understand what you're risking," Henry said. Daniel let out a small breath. "No, I think I finally do." He stepped forward, closing the distance just enough that the shift was unmistakable. "I don't need your money." Henry's expression hardened. "I don't need your connections." Veronica's lips pressed together. "And I don't need your version of what this family is supposed to look like." Silence filled the room again. This time it didn't feel fragile. It felt final. Henry stared at him, searching for something. Maybe the hesitation he had always relied on. It wasn't there. "You're making a mistake," he said, quieter now. Daniel didn't flinch. "No, I just stopped repeating one." The words settled between them like a line drawn in the ground. I stepped up beside him then, not behind, not shielded, equal. "You didn't lose anything because of me," I said, my voice steady, even though I could feel my pulse in my throat. Veronica looked at me then. Really looked. For the first time since she walked in. Her expression wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Like she couldn't quite process how I had gone from someone she could dismiss to someone standing in front of her like this. Henry took a step closer. "You have no idea what you've set in motion," he said quietly. I held his gaze. "Maybe not, but I know what I'm not going to allow anymore." Another silence. Different again. Not waiting, not fragile, just clear. Daniel didn't move back. "I know, and I'm choosing it anyway." That was it. There was nothing left to negotiate. Henry straightened up, the mask slipping back into place, but thinner now. "This isn't over," he said. Daniel didn't respond. Veronica turned toward the door without another word. Neither of them looked at Noah again. The door opened, closed, and suddenly the house felt bigger, quieter, like something heavy had just been removed from it. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I let it out. Behind me, Noah's grip loosened slightly. "Are they coming back?" he asked, his voice small but steady. I turned, crouching down so I was at his level. I didn't rush the answer, because for the first time I wasn't trying to reassure him with something I couldn't guarantee. I was trying to tell him the truth in a way that would hold. "Maybe," I said. His eyes searched mine. "But whether they do or not, we're okay." He studied my face for a second, the same way he always did when he was deciding if something felt real. Then he nodded. okay. Daniel stood a few feet behind us, watching. Not tense, not waiting, just present. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel like we were reacting anymore. We weren't bracing for the next hit. We weren't trying to fix something broken. We were standing in something new, and it didn't depend on anyone else to hold.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 5. What We Kept. A few weeks later, the noise didn't disappear. It just changed shape. The video was still there, still circulating, still being shared, but it wasn't explosive anymore. It wasn't something people watched for shock. It had become something else. An example, a story people pointed to when they talked about boundaries, about family, about what happens when someone finally says no. I stopped checking it after a while, not because it stopped mattering, but because it didn't define what came next. What mattered was what happened around it. Henry didn't step down from his position at Hargrove Consulting. He was forced out. Daniel found out through a former colleague who still kept one foot inside that world. There had been pressure from the board, concerns about reputation, questions about leadership judgment. None of it mentioned us directly, but it didn't have to. Veronica's name faded in a different way. No announcement, no statement, just fewer invitations, fewer appearances, the kind of silence that spreads quietly through social circles until one day you realize someone who used to be everywhere isn't anywhere at all. There was no celebration when we heard, no sense of victory, just a quiet understanding. Actions have weight, and sometimes they come back. At work, things shifted too. Marcus called me into his office again, but this time there was no video playing on his screen. He slid a folder across the desk instead. "I think you're ready for something bigger," he said. I opened it, scanning the project details, the scope, the responsibility. "This is a lot." He nodded. "It is, but you've handled more than most people here even realize." I looked up at him. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore," he added, "but if you want to move forward, this is the kind of opportunity that does it." I let the words settle. For a long time, everything I did had been about proving something, that I could handle it, that I deserved to be there, that I wasn't what people assumed. This felt different. "I want it," I said. Marcus gave a small nod. "I thought you would." When I walked out, Lila was waiting, like she always somehow was when something shifted. She leaned against my desk, arms crossed, smiling. "So, big promotion energy, or am I reading this wrong?" I laughed softly. "Something like that." She tilted her head, studying me. "Told you they'd see it eventually." "Maybe," I said, but it wasn't about being seen anymore. Later that week, Sophie asked to meet. We chose a quiet coffee shop, the kind of place where no one looked twice at anyone else. She looked nervous when I walked in. "Thank you for coming," she said quickly. I nodded, sitting across from her. "You said you had something." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. "I kept the full video," she said, "not just the part that got shared." She turned the screen toward me. I watched. This time, it didn't cut off right after Daniel spoke. It kept going. I saw people shift uncomfortably in their seats. I saw a woman near the front shake her head. I saw someone else stand halfway up, like they wanted to say something, then sit back down. And then a voice from somewhere behind the camera. "That's not okay." Soft, not loud enough to stop the moment, but there. Another voice followed. She shouldn't have said that. Not everyone had been silent. They just hadn't been loud enough to change what happened. I looked up at Sophie. "Why didn't you include this?" She shrugged slightly. "Because the moment that mattered was already clear." I nodded. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm sorry for how they treated you." I believed her. "Thank you," I said. When we left, I felt something shift again. Not in the world, in me.
Back at home, Daniel was in the kitchen when I walked in, sleeves rolled up, something cooking on the stove. "Smells good," I said. He glanced over, smiling. "I'm experimenting." "That's either brave or concerning." He laughed. "Probably both." There was an ease between us now that hadn't been there before. Not because things were perfect, but because they were clear. No pretending, no ignoring. Just honest. A few days later, he told me he had sold the last of his shares in the company. "Completely done," he said, leaning back in his chair. I studied his face. "You okay with that?" He nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, I am." No second thoughts? No looking back? It wasn't just a financial decision. It was a clean break. That night, Noah was on the living room floor, surrounded by toys, completely absorbed in whatever world he had built in his head. I sat on the couch, watching him, the quiet hum of the house wrapping around us. He looked up suddenly. "Mom?" "Yeah?" "I like our family." The words were simple, but they landed deeper than anything else had. I felt something in my chest loosen in a way I didn't realize had still been tight. "Me too," I said. He grinned and went back to playing like that settled everything. And maybe it did. Later, I stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching Daniel move around the space like he belonged there. No tension, no waiting, just life. It wasn't the ballroom, it wasn't the version of the future I had once imagined, but it was ours, built from choices, protected by them. I thought back to that moment in the ballroom, the silence, the eyes, the weight of being judged and measured and found lacking, and I realized something I hadn't understood then. We didn't lose anything that day. We left something behind. There's a difference. And sometimes that difference is everything. I looked at the two of them, at the life we had created in the space that was ours alone, and I knew I wouldn't trade it for anything that required me to shrink to fit. If you were standing where I stood that day, in that room with everything on the line, would you stay and try to be accepted, or would you walk away and choose to be respected?